These are some of the people that George thought was important to what's been happening in history. I thought I could do this. I don't know about you, JD, you may have to help me get her wheels. Yes, yes. These people have been very special to our lives, and George decided that he wanted to make a donation to the American Battleground Preservation Trust to continue the work that they're doing now, like Rick is working on the papers and all the stuff. You all have to know all the stuff that went on in Camden with the burials this past spring. That was really significant and a really big deal. But two more people we would like to award a History Ambassador of the Year. And these people have been very important to us, and I'm afraid one of them has already exited the area, so we'll have to continue this tomorrow at lunch when he's here. But is Mike still here? Mike was going to help. Where is he? Okay. Mike, would you come over here and get the word from Elwood?
Go ahead.
Elwood, would you please join me?
I'm sorry, right, yeah, okay.
As some of you know, Elwood has graduated from medical school, been a doctor for a long time, law school, was a lawyer for a long time, and now he's a photographer extraordinaire. And we got to know him. Those of you who've been around for a while remember when Joe Stooks used to come, and Joe was one of our favorite historians that took us back in time, and a lot of you know him, and he's passed now, but Elwood still carries on. He adopted us by his association with Joe and fallen in love with all this history, and I'd like for Elwood to come forward and receive our History Ambassador of the Year. Bill not still here? Bill, you're supposed to be up here. These are people, he's busy eating. These are people who have been significant in the history and continue to be significant in Rev War history. And please give them all a round of applause. Chris and I will share this. Thank you, dear. We appreciate all your hard work. Thank you, Johnson.
We go sit down now?
Yes,
Yeah, sure, free to sit down. No, it's a pop quiz, JD. I told you when it was going to be, it'd be no fun. Thank you so much to all the volunteers that helped us with the interpretive dance in the back and helping us get served her food. Thank you. There seems to be some more, so please feel free to enjoy some more barbecue. And if you were like me, I had to go first. But is Zach back? Hey, come on. This is a good friend of the SC250s. Zach Lemhouse is up in York County. He's, yeah, the Southern Rev War Institute. Thank you, Charles. I had a moment.
I have them all the time. So
Well, it's contagious. He is working for the SC250 on another amazing general's papers. I'm not going to say his name, but he's been, both Zach and I and the gentleman who's been working on these papers have found out a lot about this very nice film. But without further ado, Zach, introduce us to what you're... I have never heard you play this fiddle before. Turn it on.
Check one.
Oh,
No, it is on, yeah.
Now it's a comedy. That's right. Okay, I want to sit down.
Who's on first?
Well, thank you, Molly. Good evening, everyone. It is such an honor to be here at, what was it, the 21st Annual Francis Marion Symposium. I'm ashamed to say this is my first time getting here. Please forgive me. But I'm so excited to be here. It's such an honor to be asked My name is Zach Lemhouse. I am the staff historian with the Culture and Heritage Museums in York County, South Carolina. And I'm going to, before I get started, do a very shameless plug for the museums. If you don't know the Culture and Heritage Museums, we are in York County, South Carolina. We are a family of 4 museums. That includes a natural history museum in Rock Hill. It includes a Main Street Children's Museum on Main Street in Rock Hill. Less of a museum as you might think of it, more of a play place where children can come and experience through play. And then we have where my office is, which is our archives facility. We also have a public research library at the front of the house, as well as the Southern Revolutionary War Institute. The Southern Revolutionary War Institute is a scholarly research library dedicated to the study of the Southern campaigns of the American Revolution. And I am honored and blessed to be the research director of that institute. I have business cards with me. It is a great resource. I'm a little biased, but it is a great resource. So if you have any questions about the SRWI, as we call it, please come see me afterward. And then our 4th site is an 800-acre historic site in McConnell, South Carolina, known as Historic Brattonsville. Hopefully you've heard of Historic Brattonsville. We have a Revolutionary War battlefield on our site that we are the stewards of. It's the Battle of Huck's Defeat, also known as the Battle of Williamson's Plantation, July 12, 1780. If you're going to follow me with the camera, I move quite a bit, so be prepared for a workout. All right, so... if you have, I promise I'm not doing it just to mess with you. I do pace around a lot when I speak. If you want to know more about the museums, I did bring brochures with me on all the different sites, plus membership. I know that a lot of you probably live farther away, too far away to get a membership, but if you feel so inclined, it gets you discounts in all our gift shops, it gets you access to special events, discounts to special events, and free admission to all our sites. One final plug for Brattonsville, we do have coming up our annual Christmas candlelight tours, which is a huge success. It really gets you, every year, it really gets you into the Christmas spirit. If you're interested in doing that, check us out online and order those tickets ahead of time. So, enough about that. So, I fell in love with history at a very young age. My father was a South Carolina history teacher for 25 years. So I grew up with it. Family vacations were always to state parks and battlefields, and so it was really in my blood. So I knew early on that I wanted to teach. So I got a degree in teaching from Winthrop University in Rock Hill, and I taught for 5 years, 8th grade South Carolina history. I loved every minute of it. I really did. I'm not joking. And I started playing the violin when I was 7. And early on, I decided I wanted to link my love of history and my love for this instrument. So for a couple years now, I've been going around and playing and giving histories on fiddle music during the American Revolution, specifically in the Carolina backcountry, where I'm from. And I was honored earlier this year to give this presentation at the National Conference for the Colonial Dames in Washington, D.C. They flew me out. It was a wonderful time. I'd never been on an airplane before, so that was a fun experience. So, that's a nice way to put it. But anytime I give this presentation, the first thing I do is I have to answer a question that is always brought to me right at the beginning when I tell people that I play the violin or the fiddle. Does anyone want to raise your hand and give a guess at what that burning question that everybody has as soon as I tell them I play violin or fiddle?
How old is the fiddle?
I do get how old is the fiddle sometimes. This one is actually a modern reproduction. It's made to look like an 18th century violin. What's the difference? Yeah, I usually get that typically after Do You Know Devil Went Down to Georgia. That's no, I'm not prepared to play Devil Went Down to Georgia. But no, what's the difference? So first I got to go through the jokes. Okay, a violin has strings and a fiddle has strings. A fiddle has a red neck. This is the neck of the violin right here. So a fiddle has a red neck. But once we get the joke answers out of the way, I give the more boring, serious answer. There really is no difference between a fiddle and a violin, really and truly. Because if you trace this instrument's name back to its Latin root word, that root word is vitula, or vitulare, which means to sing or rejoice. And if you translate vitula or vitulare into a romantic language like Italian, you get violino or violin. But if you take vitula or vitulare and you translate it into a more Germanic language like German, right, you get fiddle or fiddle, right? What you call this instrument kind of depends on where you're from and what language you speak. So you can imagine in the Carolina backcountry, you probably did hear quite a few people call it a fiddle. So that's the first misconception I always like to address. There is no difference between a violin and a fiddle. Now, in the old-time tradition of playing, the Appalachian tradition of playing, sometimes they will make a physical modification to their fiddles or violins, if you're really wanting to press me for a physical difference. Sometimes they will file down this wooden piece here that the strings are on top of. That's called the bridge. If you file it flat, it makes it nearly impossible to hit individual strings, to do a technique called a double stop. Very prominent in old-time fiddle music, very prominent in all kinds of fiddle music. You'll hear me do double stops quite a bit tonight. That's really the only physical difference if you really want to pin me down. So, after I get done addressing that misconception, I always like to address another misconception, and that misconception is that I am a violinist, and you are a fiddle player, and never the twain shall we meet. That is a very modern notion. In fact, in the 18th and 19th centuries, that notion really did not exist. You did both, right? I'll give you an example. So, in 1831, Niccolo Paganini, probably one of the most well-known violin virtuosos in history, frequently called his violin fiddle, by the way, he toured Scotland in 1831. And in Scotland, there was this tradition that you were to play 2 sets of songs. You would get up, you'd play your first set, and it would be classical music. And then you'd take your break, and then you'd get up and you'd play your second set, and it was expected to be traditional music. In the case of his Scottish tour in 1831, Scottish fiddle tunes. That was the expectation. Well, in 1831, he did not abide by that convention, and he played 2 sets of classical violin tunes, or songs, right? And this may be hypocritical, but I've often heard it was the worst endeavor of his entire musical career. In 1831, when he toured Scotland, he did not abide by that convention. I know at least that he got raked over the coals in some of the local newspapers, especially around Aberdeen, for not abiding by that convention. I do know that in 1833, he went back to Scotland on a second tour, and this time he abided by the convention. And again, hypocritical or not, the story is that it was one of the most successful musical endeavors of his entire career. So, I always like to address that. Before I talk anymore, how about I play you a song? All right? Now I gotta walk back to the microphone. Hang on. Okay. You're earning your pay tonight, right? So that was a tune called Miss McLeod's Reel, sometimes known as Miss McLeod O'Rasty. It's a Scottish fiddle tune, appropriate for our discussion tonight. Let's talk about the violin I'm playing. This is, I think as I mentioned to you, Gerald, a reproduction of an 18th century violin. It is a modern reproduction, but it's an 18th century reproduction. Let me say that again. It is a modern violin that is an 18th century reproduction. There we go. Anyone want to take a guess at what the strings are made out of? Please raise your hand. My 8th grade teacher is going to come out. Please raise your hand. And let's take a guess at what you think these strings are made out of. You might have heard a difference if you're familiar with the way modern violins sound. This might have sounded a little different to you. Any guesses? Any guesses? Yes, sir.
Catgut.
Thank you for saying catgut. Yes. How many of you, by show of hands, how many of you think that this is made out of catgut?
That's wrong.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a great guess. Unfortunately, that's incorrect. No, that is a misconception. Steel, my other one is strung in steel, that's modern. It is the guts of an animal, I will tell you that. We all finished eating, right? It is the guts of an animal. I had always heard catgut too. It's actually sheep gut is what it is. This violin is strung in sheep gut strings. There's a couple theories as to where this misconception that violins were strung with cat guts. One theory is that Catalonia, Spain, they made a lot of instruments, and they had very accomplished string makers for these instruments, and they sold strings all over the world, right? So there is a theory that because of the popularity of Catalonian gut strings, that over time that was misheard, misremembered as catgut. Catalonian gut, catgut. Another theory, this theory I feel is less likely, but I'll say it. There's another theory. There was an instrument maker in Connecticut named Robert Catlin. And we know from newspapers, 18th century newspapers, that Catlin was making stringed instruments. It doesn't specify that he was also making strings, though. That's where this theory may not hold much water, but it is plausible that because he was an instrument maker, he was also either making strings or at least selling strings, and might have gotten a reputation for Catlin gut strings. Catlin gut, catgut, right? But no, they're actually made out of sheep gut. And you notice that it has a more mellow tone. I'll play my steel string in a minute to let you hear the difference, but this has a more mellow tone, and it goes out of tune like crazy. And I'll tell you, Niccolo Paganini played on gut. He had a disease that historians believe Abraham Lincoln had. It's called Marfan syndrome. It was what made Abraham Lincoln very tall and lanky, especially his fingers, his digits. So Paganini could do things on the neck of a violin that modern violinists and contemporary violinists with Paganini could not do because their fingers weren't as long as his were. But what Paganini would do is, as he was playing his concerts and his violin would start going out of tune, he would never retune. He would just start shifting his left hand farther and farther up the neck to compensate for his strings going out of tune. I'm not that talented, but he was. Let me play that same song for you, but I'll do it on steel strings so you can hear the difference. And I'm going to try to keep this at 30 minutes. I'm probably doing a bad job already. I've been accused of being long-winded. Let's see if this is even tuned. So here's the same song. I'll just play it through once, so we don't need to belabor the point. Here we go. There was again. Thank you, you're too kind. There was again, but on the steel strings. Could you hear a difference?
Sounds better!
this one sounds better? Yeah, and to your ear, it probably would, right? Because this is what you're used to hearing. It's going to stay in tune longer. It is clearer. There's more clarity to the sound. The gut string is a little more mellow, right? But it's definitely muted by comparison, right? So that was on modern steel string violin, so you can hear the difference. Now, you noticed in that song, I did a lot of this. Which is playing two strings simultaneously. Instead of playing them individually, I'm droning, for lack of a better term, an open string as I play. Now that technique originates from Scotland, and that technique was brought over to the American colonies with the Scots-Irish Presbyterian settlers when they came over in the 1740s, 1750s. The reason that technique exists is because in 1746, the King of England passed a law called the Acts of Prescription. And the Acts of Prescription outlawed quintessentially Scottish things. It outlawed the kilt and outlawed the playing of bagpipes. Again, there's conflicting sources for this particular story, but some sources suggest that it was outlawed because bagpipes were considered, quote, instruments of war, end quote. And that may sound silly to you, but if you realize the significance of the bagpipe to Scottish warfare, it's not silly. The bagpipes actually were used to march Scottish soldiers into battle. That's why in a moment when I play a song for you, it's called a piped march, is what this kind of tune is called, because those kinds of tunes were used to march soldiers into battle. So why? Why would the King of England outlaw Scottish things? To destroy the Scottish culture. That's the short answer. Destroy the Scottish culture. Because if you can destroy someone's culture, you can subjugate them a lot easier. We're guilty of that in the United States. We did that with Native Americans, putting them in schools, forcing them to not speak their native language and punishing them when they spoke their native languages, right? For this very same reason. It's easy to force someone to conform to your way of life if you destroy their way of life. So that's why the King of England passed this act of prescription. However, the Scottish people, if you know anything about Scottish people, I'm sure we have some Scots-Irish people in the room today. If you know anything about them, you know that they will not be suppressed. So they kept playing their marches, their pipe tunes. And to get around it, they played them on instruments that were perfectly legal. And they started emulating pipe tunes on the violin. So I'm going to play a tune for you now. I'll do it on my gut string violin. This is a pipe march, and if you close your eyes as I play, hopefully you won't be able to distinguish between my violin and a bagpipe, except bagpipes are a lot louder.
Yes.
And primarily the way I'm doing that is I'm droning an open string along with the string that I'm putting my fingers on, if that makes sense.
Which string is it?
Yeah, so let me see, hang on. I need to get like a headset.
Oh.
I said I need to get like a headset or something.
I can always follow you around.
Follow me around? So if you know anything about the violin, you know that the violin from the string closest to me to the one farthest from me, or thickest to thinnest, if you want to think of it that way, is G, D, A, E. So what I'm droning is I'm putting my fingers on the A string, but I'm droning that D string. And to get an even more bagpipey sound, if that's a word, is I'm actually playing, and this is for the violin people in the audience, I'm playing in third position on the A string, taking it up higher, and it really gives it a nice pipey sound. That tune is called Highland Laddie, or Heeland Laddie, I guess. But that is a traditional pipe march that would have been played on the violin or the pipes when they were legal in the 18th century and before. It's an older tune than that. I'm going to show you one more thing before I go. But before that, are there any questions for me thus far in the presentation?
So when did they drop the prohibition against bagpipes, do you know?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Because when you think of England or Scotland or the British Isles, pipes always come to my mind.
And they had, even prior to 1746, that's not the first time they outlawed bagpipes. Bagpipes were actually outlawed as early as 1560, which would have been during the Reformation in Scotland. They outlawed bagpipes then as well. Before I forget, and then I saw your hand, let's talk about how it gets over to the American colonies. So, in the 1740s and 1750s, I think I mentioned it just a moment ago, you see a large-scale migration of Scots-Irish Presbyterians coming from a place in northern Ireland known as the Ulster Plantation. And they're coming over to the American colonies, typically in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the major port city, and then they gradually, over generations, move south down what's called the Great Wagon Road. And if you overlay a map of the Great Wagon Road with a map of what we think of as Appalachia, it is almost right on top of each other, right, if that makes sense. So as these Scots-Irish Presbyterians were coming south, they were finding a spot that they wanted to make home, and they were stopping there and raising a family. And they brought with them their tradition of playing music, and it eventually evolved into what we think of as old-time American fiddle music. In fact, the tune I played earlier today, Miss McLeod's Reel, or Miss McLeod or Bessie, it is considered, if there are old-time fiddlers in the audience, it's considered an old-time tune, even though it was a Scottish tune first. It is considered an old-time tune. They actually switched the A part and the B part around on that song, and they call it Brother Joe. You ever seen The Devil, Brother Joe, Brother Joe? Have you ever seen The Devil, Brother Joe? Yeah. Scottish tune that was brought over with the Scots-Irish Presbyterians. What is Scots-Irish? My predecessor, Michael Scoggins, I hope you knew him before he passed, he did a lot of research into what does it mean to be Scots-Irish. And in a nutshell, the King of England, and a lot of times forced the migration of lowland Scots to Northern Ireland. Why is he forcing the migration of lowland Scots? Because after the Reformation, they're Presbyterian, right? And there had been a break with the Catholic Church. So, again, destroying one's culture to make it easier to subjugate them, the king wanted to put pockets of Presbyterians in Northern Ireland, which is heavily Catholic. So he was hoping that he could shift the balance in Northern Ireland to make it Protestant. As these lowland Scots move into the Ulster Plantation, their culture mixes with the Irish, right? So quite literally, if you are Scots or Scotch-Irish, both terms are acceptable. You're a mix of those two cultures, and that's how that originated. I think I had another question. I'm sorry, I started talking. Did you have a question, sir? No? Okay. Yes?
FYI, my ancestor came over from Ulster, Ireland in 1736
1736.
to the coast of North Carolina. And there was a big influx in the 1730s to around the Wilmington area. And that was earlier than 45.
And that's a great point. So the 1740, 1750 date, that's specifically the ones that came into Philadelphia and came down the Wagon Road. But you are correct, sir. That's not exclusively the way Scots-Irish Presbyterians arrived here. That's absolutely right. Any other questions? All right, perfect.
Zach?
Yes.
the violin or the fiddle being very expensive. Was that, did they make their own? Did they buy their own? I mean, that's quite an instrument to bring over.
There were quite talented Scottish violin makers. And yes, they were expensive, but not cost prohibitive necessarily. Very, very excellent Scottish violin makers. And the reason they were so popular, and this will segue right into the last little bit of my presentation, they were so popular, of course, because of their size, right? They're easy to carry around. Speaking of size, I'll show you my last instrument for the evening. So when George Whitefield, he's an evangelist, or he came through the Carolinas, and he commented with much disdain that there was a dance master or dance mistress in every small town that he visited. Because why do you make music? Well, for pleasure and to dance to, right? And he's correct. There were quite a few dance masters and dance mistresses in the colonies, especially in the Carolinas. And when they were teaching and instructing people to dance, they clearly didn't have canned music that they could put on a record or find it on their iPhone. And they weren't going to hire a musician to come for dance practice. Because as opposed to today, you could actually make quite a good living being a musician back then. So what they would do is they would often learn to play violin themselves. So they could play the dance music for their students as they instructed. But playing the violin and dancing at the same time is a difficult feat that I have not mastered yet. So they would often learn to play this instrument. Hang on. So they would often learn to play this instrument. This is a French instrument, but if you were anyone who was anyone in the 18th century that played violin, you had one of these. Thomas Jefferson had 3, I think, at least 2, maybe 3. This is called a pochette, P-O-C-H-E-T-T-E, pochette. And pochette means little pocket, tiny pocket, right? Because it would fit in the pocket of a greatcoat, right? It's pocket size. Of course, in true American fashion, we can't say pochette. That's a foreign word. It's too hard to pronounce. So they started calling it pocket fiddle. And in true American fashion, pocket was a little too long. So they started calling it kit, K-I-T. So a lot of times you can see these referred to as kit fiddles or a dance master's kit, because dance masters would usually instruct their students in dancing while playing these instruments. It's easier to play and dance with this at the same time. So for the conclusion of my presentation, because I've probably been talking too long, I'm going to play a song on the kit fiddle. Don't get excited. It sounds as you would imagine it sounds. Okay, this will be a fun experiment. I want you to imagine what you think this sounds like. And then I'm going to play it, and you're probably not that far off. So that is the pochette or the kit fiddle. How close were you when you imagined what this would sound like? Yes, again, it's not for performance. It is for instructing and a lot of times composing. Thomas Jefferson liked it because he was a lawyer for a while. And he traveled around quite frequently to clients' houses. And he would stay up late and play, and he wouldn't disturb them because it was such a soft sound. Right? So that is my time. I don't want to take up any more of your time. It has been an absolute honor to be here and speak to you. I'll take a couple questions. Yes.
Let me just mention to her question. In 1737, the Stradivarius arrived in the United States from Italy. Those violins are selling between $12 and $20 million a piece today.
So I'm glad you brought up Stradivarius violins because it leads me into a tangent that I wouldn't have gotten into otherwise. Thank you. So it's interesting. This may make your skin crawl when I tell you this, but you will not find an 18th century violin like a Stradivarius. You will not find one with the original neck on it. The original neck has been discarded. So what they would do with 18th century violins is, so today, the neck of the violin is glued into a neck pocket that's been constructed here. But back in the 18th century, there wasn't a neck pocket. It went on straight, not at an angle like it is today, and they put a single nail through it into the body of the violin, and that's what held it on. And because they were gut strings, less tension on the strings, it didn't pull the neck off. But you can't play that way today. So what they do with the original Stradivarius violins or any other original 18th century violin is they will discard that neck and put a modern neck on it. So if you've seen a Stradivarius violin or seen someone play one, it's almost all original. They're so expensive, in fact, you mentioned the price, that individuals typically can't own them. Large foundations will own them and then loan them to accomplished violinists to play them in concert. They have not yet offered to let me play a Stradivarius violin. So if you have any connections, maybe pull some strings for me. Any other? Yes, please, yes.
There's 650 Stradivarius violins in the world today, and only 7 are privately owned.
So there are some privately owned ones. Out of 650, only 7 are privately owned. Wow. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Where does the fiddle come in with bluegrass?
Yes. So the question, if you couldn't hear, was how does the fiddle come in with bluegrass? So bluegrass evolves from old time, from American. So Scottish or Scots-Irish to the colonies gives you old time as they settle here in America, and then gradually old-time fiddle music morphs into bluegrass fiddle music. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Since we're at the Francis Marion Symposium, is a factoid for people. Dancing was very, very popular in the area of Utah Springs and that whole central part of South Carolina in that area. And after the Revolutionary War, when Marion was really struggling to rebuild his plantation, he would send off the products of his plantation to a factor or to a merchant, and he would say, here you've got so many pounds of salt pork, and here's my shopping list of what I'd like you to send me back. And on one of those shopping lists is, please give Buddy a fiddle. So Buddy fiddled, and they had music at Pond Bluff.
Any other questions or?
Yeah, does anybody else want to see me run through the crowd?
We had a debate here at this table about John Adams when he was writing the Declaration, when he and Jefferson were writing the Declaration in that famous Broadway show, 1776.
Okay.
Were they both violin players, John Adams and
not
Tom
think John
Jefferson?
Adams was a violinist, no.
Was not, okay.
No, I do not.
Almost.
Now, Patrick Henry was. Give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry was a violin player. But I do not think John Adams was. I could be wrong on
Tell
that.
us how you got interested in playing that instrument at a young age and how you kept developing it.
I saw a local band play at my church, local old-time bluegrass group play at my church. when I was around 5 or 6 years old, and I thought, man, I want to learn to play that. So my mom took that to mean he wants to learn to play classical violin. And she enrolled me in classical violin lessons at the Winthrop Academy of Music. And it was a great experience for me. I had an absolutely wonderful violin teacher. She may still be there. I don't know, her name's Diana Matusa was her name, I don't know. And she was, I think, Romanian, and she had just come over. In fact, I remember maybe my second year taken from her, we threw her a party because she got her citizenship. And she was a wonderful lady. I loved working with her. She was convinced I couldn't see. And she was convinced I couldn't see because I can play pretty well by ear, and I didn't, as a 7 and 8-year-old, didn't want to learn to read the music. So I'd kind of stare at the page and pretend I was reading the music. And I was playing along by ear, and that worked at first when the songs were pretty easy, but as they got harder, she was convinced that, well, he was doing so well before, he must not be able to see the notes on the page, so I wore glasses when I didn't need to for about 2.5 years before I came clean to my mom and dad and said, look, I don't know how to read this music. I can see just fine. But no, and then gradually, when I got in high school, I got interested, I really started pursuing the fiddle, and started going to fiddle conventions, and I started taking specifically old-time violin lessons. And then I started going to the camp that you see mentioned in my bio, the Jink and Diddle School of Fiddle. In fact, that's where the title of my talk tonight comes from. And then I'll take one more question and let you go, because I know you're tired of... I'll take a couple more questions. I know you're tired of hearing me talk, but Robert Burns, the Scottish poet, he wrote a poem called Epistle to Major Logan. You can look it up. And in that poem, there's a phrase, a stanza, where he says, "Hail thee heart, and hail thee fiddle, and lang may your elbuck, jink and diddle." And that's where the name of, well, one, Hail Thee You Fiddle, the name of my presentation tonight, but the school that I have been attending since 2006 and teaching at since 2014 is the Jink and Diddle School of Scottish Fiddle. And so I started going there in 2006 and learned a lot of these traditional Scottish fiddle tunes. It was an absolutely wonderful experience.
We have Charles.
Charles.
Zach, please tell our audience what your current gig is with the fiddle.
Oh, and I think that's in my bio too. So I play with a couple bands, and one of them is the WBT Briarhoppers. We've since dropped the WBT moniker, so if you look us up online, we're the legendary Briarhoppers. But it was in the 30s, and I should know because I am a historian, 34. In 1934, the WBT radio station in Charlotte, North Carolina, needed a band to hawk snake oil on the airwaves of the radio. Things like collarback hair solution and Radio Girl perfume and stuff like that. And they called the radio station manager. His name was Crutchfield, and he said, "Do you have a band that can play music and hawk this stuff over the radio?" And he said, "Sure." He lied. He didn't. So he pulled together, kind of like the Monkees, if you're familiar with the Monkees, that only one monkey was actually a musician. I think that's right. That was kind of the deal with the Briarhoppers at first, and they gradually became very talented musicians and became very famous. And we are, I'm lucky to be a member of the band, we are the longest continuously running bluegrass band in the world, as far as I can reckon. I look pretty good for joining the band in 1934. No, I'm 33, but I was hired by the guy that was hired by the guy that was hired by the guy that was hired by the original Briarhopper. So when one Briarhopper retires, they simply hire their replacement. So it's been a real blessing to play with them. I really do enjoy making music with them. Yes, sir?
Go back to the 18th century for a second.
Sure, yeah. Okay, I'm there.
The fiddle, in the Revolutionary War, how prevalent had the use for actually having fiddlers?
Very prevalent, yeah. In fact, there are examples of battles where, shoot, and I should have looked it up before I came, but there is a battle that I know of, and Charles may be able to tell me, or someone in here that's smarter than me, but I do recall that there is a battle where there's actually a fiddle player on the field during the battle. But no, it was very prevalent, especially in camp life, right? You bring your fiddle with you, and you would play. Very, very prevalent instrument. In fact, not in America quite so much, but in European warfare, when they would see the battlefield after the battle, they would find in the litter pochettes where people were bringing their kit fiddle into battle in their pocket. And then when they were getting killed or retreating, they were leaving those things on the field. So they were actually finding pochettes on fields of battle. More in Europe, I don't know if there's any examples of that here in the colonies. But great question. Yes, very prevalent. Yes?
Quick one, do you still play any classical?
Not that I'm prepared to play right now. The answer is yes. Yes, so I did eventually learn to read music well enough. I'm still not a great sight reader. Some people can just look at a page of music they've never seen before in their lives. Maybe some of you can do this. Are there any musicians out there? Maybe some of you can do this, whether it's violin or piano or guitar or whatever it may be. There are people that can look at a song they've never seen a day in their life. They could open it up and look at those black dots and just play. I'm not that person, but I can read note to note enough to learn the song. But in my mind, that's the point, especially in traditional music. So there's this misconception that fiddle music, you don't read music. You do it all by ear. And that's not true. In fact, Scotland was publishing more music than anywhere else in the world because of the printing press, right? They were using the printing press to publish written music. So this idea that fiddle players don't read music, that's not necessarily true. That's a misconception. But in my mind, the idea, especially the traditional music, is you use that music to learn it. And then the point is to put it to memory and make it your own. You won't hear any two fiddle players play the same tune the same way. Because they're taking the tune and then they're making it their own. You can tell what it is, the melody's the same, but there are always slight variations in the melody or slight variations with technique, and that's what makes this style of music very special, I think.
Well, play your favorite bluegrass for us.
I will play my favorite bluegrass tune for you, but yes, sir.
Modern musicians they care for their instruments diligently. They will not leave them in the trunk of a hot car in the sunshine. How do you deal with an instrument like that on a battlefield in the 1700s?
Yeah, so the reason that you do not want to leave instruments in a hot car is because they are designed to come apart with heat. That is by design. So they actually use something called hide glue. And you know, it's horse, get out a horse, right? And all modern day violins are put together with hide glue because they are meant to last. They're meant to outlive their owners, which is why there are so many old violins out there. This one, you'll notice that I have to fix it again. No, you'll notice this one. I do repairs on violins, so if I had dropped it, I would have fixed it. It would have been embarrassing. But no, there's actually a crack going down the face of this one. That when I got it, someone did what I just did and dropped it, but didn't catch it. So yeah, I was able to take the face off by heating it up, and it just popped right off. Because that's the point. To your question, how did they deal with that on a battlefield? I guess you keep it in the shade, right? Like I wish I had a better answer. I really wish I had a better answer for you.
It might be because the temperature ranges are so slow to change. That happens in historic homes. So you walk in the air conditioning here, you walk in the heat. It's a very drastic change.
But you certainly do not want to leave it. And cars aren't good because it's an oven, right? If it's outside, that's one thing. But if it's in your car, it bakes it.
For those of us that play the piano, it's not a problem.
Not a problem. You don't leave your piano in the car.
I never leave my piano unattended in my car.
How about Orange Blossom Special?
Orange Blossom Special. Okay, so I will give you that minus some of the train whistles if you don't mind.
Okay.
But yes, I do some Orange Blossom Special. Sure. Orange Blossom Special.
This is great.
So that was the Orange Blossom has to be my favorite bluegrass song. If you're really dying for one more, do you just one more? So my favorite old time song, it always changes depending on when you ask me. So sometimes it is one called Ragtime Annie. But recently I've really been loving one, and I'll do it for you because I like the title. It's called Nail That Catfish to the Tree. Any other questions? Yes, and then yes.
Did all of those old songs have lyrics to them?
It's funny you ask. Some did, but more often than not, the tune existed first. Sometimes the tune existed for a very long time, and then they added lyrics to it. They being, well, whoever. But Robert Burns, again, the Scottish poet, had a habit of doing this. There was one, I'll play it for you. I'll play the tune first. It sounds like this. The bow I'm playing with is what's called a Baroque bow, not a Baroquean bow, a Baroque bow. And it is shorter than a modern violin bow. And I'm going to say that is why I went off the rails there for a hot minute. Because sometimes I forget it is shorter. I mean, that's a big deal. But yeah, so that was an old tune, Scottish tune. But we call it today, My Love, She's But a Lassie Yet. And the reason we call it My Love, She's But a Lassie Yet is because Robert Burns, or someone he knew, was in love with somebody that was a little too young. Because he took that tune and he wrote lyrics to go with it. And the lyrics go, My love, she's but a lassie yet. Yes, my love, she's but a lassie yet. If I wait a year or twa, she'll maybe half say sassy yet. So that is a good example. So yes, a lot of these tunes do have lyrics. Sometimes they're more written with the lyrics.
How about the theme from Deliverance?
I won't give you the theme from Deliverance, but because I don't know it well enough. But I can give you a theme from something else. Anybody know what theme I'm asked to play the most? Like every time I play, I'm asked to play this theme.
It's Sock Farewell.
It's called A Shokin Farewell.
Yeah.
It is the theme from, anybody know?
Ken Burns is Civil
Ken Burns.
Ken Burns' Civil War.
Yeah.
Written well before that.
Yes, written well after the Civil War. The guy that wrote it is a guy named Jay Unker. Jay Unker is still playing. He's alive and well and playing. It's a modern tune, but it just sounded so nice that Ken Burns wanted to use it in his documentary. It is not a Civil War tune. He wrote it. It was a camp for children, and that he attended, he taught at. And at the end, it was called Camp Ashokin. And at the end of their time together, he was so sad at their parting that he wrote this very beautiful tune called A Shokin Farewell. Thank you for your time. So thank you guys so much. If you want to come up and see me, if you have a chance to come speak, I have business cards. You can come take a look at violins up close. You can touch them, you can play them. Come say hello.
Let's give Zach another round of applause.